Today we are going to draw some fairy houses, and this we're going to do a little woodland scene. So I start with where everything's happening, a little setting. So I'm going to think of a fairy house on a tree stump. So I'm going to get my tree, and I have another cluster of trees over here. These are thinner trees. This is our main tree. It's hard to see. I like to draw my sketching with a very light pencil, working darker. So I'm going to think of kind of a horizon line, even though it'll be all forest. All right, so with a fairy house, I'm going to draw two different kinds of fairy houses. I'm going to draw one built into this tree stump. And so in thinking of this fairy house, we get to be architects here. So I know that I want the house to be between these roots of this tree. I might make those roots a little bigger. And we're going to build a roof. This roof will be built out of, let's make it out of leaves. So we'll tie a couple of leaves together. And the great thing about fairy houses is they are totally up to your imagination. You get to decide what gets to be put into your fairy house. So leaves there, and maybe we'll have a little kind of side building. We'll put our front porch. And the front porch, I'm going to build it out of a leaf. There we go. Again, I'm drawing very lightly because I'm going to have to erase all of these pencil lines. And with a fairy house, it's going to be a little crooked. It's going to be a little weirdly shaped, and that's totally okay because it's made out of woodland elements, just whatever the fairy can drag up. And maybe we'll have some special little flowers that the fairy has planted. A little fairy garden bed. And some pebble stepping stones over to the neighbor's. All right, the neighbor's house. This is not up against a tree. This one is kind of between the trees. So let's make this one out of mushrooms. So I'm going to think of the mushroom and think of those big red and white mushrooms. They've got spots. So this is going to be made out of a big red and white mushroom, maybe a smaller mushroom for a side house. There's still these trees in between, and a little mushroom out back here. So the neighbor's house gets a little rounded doorway. And we'll put a little half window in the door. And we'll make this mushroom a 2-story house. So we'll put a little dormer window up here. There we go. And we have these other little mushrooms back here. This fairy's got a big house. all these little mushrooms. They can just grow a new house as they need it. And they get a front porch step. Okay, so you see how we're slowly adding details. We start with the big picture, we're slowly adding details. We know that we need foliage to fill in the forest. So I'm going to draw some ferns. Ferns like to curl at the ends as they unfurl. So I start with kind of a curly line, and then they get smaller and smaller as they get out to the point of that curly line. So I'm just loosely drawing fern fronds. For those of you that like the fern fronds, we're drawing fern fronds. And more fern fronds. We're going to have a fern frond over here too for balance so that it's not just one fern. Think of the whole picture. And back here, maybe we'll have a couple of fern fronds. You can really get the idea that these fairy houses are in the forest. Okay, let's have some other flowers and leaves and things decorating this woodland scene. And maybe we'll say they're getting ready for a party. So we're going to string some little fairy party lights. This is actually going to be a bigger string of fairy party lights. I don't know what they make the little fairy party lights out of, but they're going to be little fairy party lights. You can see the whole scene comes together. It comes to life as you add the little details. I'm going to make the tree stump more interesting. And maybe we'll put, I don't know, this is a great focal point. Let's put a little well. So the fairies need a little fairy well to get their fairy water from. Okay, maybe they wouldn't have a fairy well. Maybe I'm just joking here because they're probably getting their water from collecting dew off of the leaves and stuff in the morning. But if they had a fairy well, the fairy well would be right here between their two little fairy houses in their little fairy neighborhood with their little fairy party lights. And there's another plant back here. And maybe some ivy, some other leaves. So we get the idea that this is deep in the woods. And by now you're thinking, man, that picture is really cluttered. There's a whole lot of stuff going on. Yes, that happens a lot when you're drawing. You as the creator need to remember where things are, what your little random pencil marks mean. And so sometimes when I've got a complex picture like this, I'll trace a second pencil drawing that's a little bit more refined. But for the sake of this, we're just going to go with it as it is. Okay, whenever I'm drawing a complex picture, I like to start with whatever's either foreground, so whatever's going to be in the front, or whatever's really the most complex. And since we're not going to have time to do a whole bunch of details, I'm just going to start with whatever's in the foreground. And the most foreground elements are leaves. We've got a bunch of leaves at the corner of the picture. So I'm going to start with these. And if I were drawing this for one of my typical clients or something, I would spend a lot more time than what I'm doing here. This is a quick, fun sketch. You don't always have to do things perfectly. You can do some fun sketches just for the sake of drawing sketches. It doesn't always have to have a purpose. And so that's kind of what this drawing is. It's for the fun of it. Okay, so we've got the foreground. Now let's see. This well kind of is in the foreground. So we're gonna add a little flower because, you know, a well should have flowers next to it. And the well is going to be made up of little rocks. So we're going to build our well out of rocks. We get the shape of a well. We don't have to draw all the rocks, but we get the idea that it's made out of rocks. And it's got the little wooden uprights. I'm using the tip of my pen to get the finer details. And then the side of the pen to get broader lines. We've got a rope going down into the well and just the suggestion of the back side of the well. It's dark in the well, so we'll make it dark in there. And then the roof of the well, we'll do this as little shingles. So I'm just drawing what would shingles look like on a little fairy well. Is they're kind of overlapped, kind of like fish scales. So I'm just drawing these little overlapping fish scale kind of things. I'm going to put a little darker line underneath just to suggest this shadow. And we've got this cute little fairy well. Okay, so that's foreground. Looks like I've got a few more leaves over here. And then we've got these little front porch rocks. Again, they don't have to be perfect. We don't want perfection, actually. When things are too perfect, then they actually look unnatural. So you want to occasionally have something that's just a little out of shape. A little imperfection is a-okay. And this house is going to have a bigger fairy rock first little door approach. Okay. We've got this little tree that the fairy lights are hanging from. So think about what kind of tree it is. I'm going to make it a little lumpy. And I'm going to put some kind of a bush or something there. I don't know what it is. You don't always have to know what it is that you're drawing. That's another thing about art. I'll put things in my picture that they look cool. I don't know exactly what they are, but it looks good. So it's in there. All right. We've got our string of fairy lights. And we've got the fairy lights are coming in front of the house, so we have to put them in first. If I were coloring this scene, it would be fun to do at night with these little fairy lights. But it would also be a very tricky picture. And we've got our fairy tree. There we go. It's fun to look on the internet and get ideas for how other people have drawn fairy houses, or how you could add some little details. So I'm going to put a little break in the mushroom. Growing up, I used to watch the Smurfs a lot. Not the newer Smurfs as much as I do like them, but the old Smurfs, and they lived in those little mushroom houses out in the forest. So we've got, and with the tip of the pen, I'm drawing my little details. We've got our little mushroom house back here. I'm going to darken it just under the rim of the mushroom. And that just gives it a little bit more depth. You can tell that there's a bit of a shadow back there. And the hint of a fern. If you want a good book about ferns, Where the Red Fern Grows, such a classic. I remember my 5th grade teacher reading that book to us and crying at the end. Such a good book. So whenever I think of ferns, I think of Where the Red Fern Grows. If you want a good summer read and you're okay with crying. And then by the same author, you could do Summer of the Monkeys. That's a fun book too. Those don't actually have much to do with fairy houses. They just have to do with ferns. Okay. And putting some cracks there. He's got that little dormer window. See how important it was that we drew our fairy lights first, because the roof is behind the fairy lights. So darken it a little bit under the eaves there. And we could put some more details, but we really don't have time if we're also going to throw a little color into this picture. And we'll decorate. He's already got a bit of a roof going on, but I'm going to put just some kind of a, I don't even know what this is, but it's over the door. Some kind of a shelter over the door. There we go. Got a cute little door. For continuity of style, I'm doing all windows that have the little crossbars in them. You can add more variety. But sometimes you want to do a recurring element throughout your picture that just kind of ties the whole thing together. So you know that these are neighbors, they're friendly, and they've decided to use the same style in their architecture. So it just ties the whole picture together a little bit better. And I call it continuity of design. In fact, I took a whole college class back 20-some years ago when I was in art school called Continuity of Design. And it was all about how to put unifying and tying elements throughout different aspects of your work. So whether you were doing an animation or some promotional things, plus your artwork, then you'd want to make sure that everything felt like it fit together. So it was a really good class. Also, one of my favorite professors taught it. We called him Cool Teacher. Or I did. I don't know what the other kids called him. Okay. And another little window peeking out there. We're getting this little village together. I've got some more ferns back here. Might as well ink those. There we go. Another fern. Oh, I love my ferns. Living in the Pacific Northwest, there's so many different ferns. We went for a walk over on the coast a few months ago, just looking at the variety of ferns and everything covered in moss. It's so wet there on the coast and just makes for a gorgeous setting. I don't have nearly enough moss in this picture, but then we wouldn't have any details if it was all moss. So gotta leave some things out. There's a rock. I don't know why there's a rock there, but we're putting a rock there. Okay. And now let's work on this other fairy house. So we've got, there we go. This one has leaves. So I'm going to think what kind of leaf. These are going to be leaves with slightly rough edges. I like to do long, smooth strokes whenever possible to signify something smooth, but then be ready to mix up the strokes. So if you have a rough-edged leaf, then use lots of short strokes, but keep them consistent. And frequently I turn my paper to get the better angle for my hand. So if this seems awkward for you, it's okay to turn the paper. So you're building different textures as you draw. So here I used a rough line to suggest bark. Here I used lots of short stubby lines. It gives a different feel. So be ready to mix it up as needed. There we go. And I'm putting a little detail in. I'm going to add a little shadow line. Remember, I said we put a little bit of shadow under the picture to show that it's got some depth to it. Okay. And we're going to do a front porch. I don't know exactly. Again, I don't know what that front porch little awning is made out of. The uprights, however, are going to be twigs. So I'm going to give a little bit of a detail. And put another little twig in. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Imperfections make these fairy houses far more interesting. Let's see, we'll do another little half circle for the front door. They need to see who's coming to the door. And this door is made out of wood. So I'm going to make it look a little bit more like it's got wood grain to it. There we go. We got some wood grain going on. He's got some flowers planted over at his house. I don't know what kind of flowers these are. They're generic flowers. They're little, considering how big the ferns are. Okay, we've got the window. This window I put a window box on. I don't know what's going to be in the window box. It's pretty small. With this big, thick pen, I'm not going to get too many details, so I'm not going to worry about it. And have some kind of plant over there. There we go. Got this other little part of the house tucked behind the plants. So when we're coloring it, we want to make sure that all of this is colored the same. And so this house is made more out of wood or something. So I'm going to make it look like it's constructed out of wood or something. So there we go. It's got some stripy stuff going on. Okay. Then I think the fairy lights are just going to kind of go to that tree. I don't think I'm going to tie them all the way around the tree. if fairies had parties. Would they have tiki torches? Or would they have fairy lights? They'd probably have fairy lights. Like or like fireflies locked in little jars or something. Maybe they wouldn't need to use a jar. Maybe they had tame fireflies. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we don't get fireflies. Fireflies are really mystical to see. So it's one thing I miss from summers in the Midwest. I've been a few times and seen all of the pretty fireflies, thunderstorms. Well, I mean, you also get tornadoes and stuff, but variety throughout this whole country. Lots of different things to enjoy no matter where you live. Okay, we'll do another fern frond here. I know it was some kind of other plant, but I'm on a fern kick today. There we go. And we'll put that tree root. It's supposed to be back here somewhere. Okay, and we got that fern frond. Oh, happy fern frond. All right. And we've got that other fern frond. This is a bigger fern frond. So we're going to get that back there. And there we go. Okay, and we've got some plants of some kind back here. All right. We have a very complicated picture here, but it's got lots of cool details. I'm going to add some finalizing elements, tufts of grass, things in the foreground. You definitely want to feel like you are deep in the woods, and I think we did a good job of conveying that in this picture. All right. There comes a point, there's something that I heard in art school many years ago. Good art is never completed, it's merely abandoned. So there comes a point when we have to just say, okay, we're done, we need to stop, and let's erase the pencil lines and then take a little bit of a break. So to erase, especially something where I've got to erase the whole page, hold down with one hand and take your eraser and erase in smooth strokes in one direction. Don't scrub back and forth because you run the risk of ripping the paper. So I'm just going nice smooth strokes, firmly, but without scrubbing back and forth. And I do very loose pencil work. If I were doing this for my own projects, then I would have traced this onto a second piece of paper using a light table. But you at home might not have a light table. You could use a window, a nice sunny window. But for the sake of the picture, we are going to erase. And there we go. idyllic little fairy neighborhood. All covered in eraser bits. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe this off, not on the table so that it's not leaving eraser bits all over my table. And when we're done, we have our little fairy village all ready to color. And we'll come back a little bit and color this picture. Thanks for joining us.